Good evening, everyone. I'm Margot Norton. I'm the chief curator here at BAM-PSA, and I'm so honored to welcome you to our conversation this evening with artists May Weatherford and Aria Dean, moderated by Katy Siegel. Thank you for joining us. This program, Gut Punch, Reenvisioning Gestural Abstraction, is in conjunction with our exhibition, Making Their Mark, works from the Shah Garg Collection, which is on view in your main galleries. I hope you all had a chance to see the show. If you haven't, it's on view till April 20th, so you have plenty of time, and come back and back. I feel like I learn something new each time I take people through the show, and yeah, I'm so thrilled that this incredible collection is on view in our galleries for the next 5 months. The exhibition brings together 78 works from 68 artists from the Shah Garg Collection, a Bay Area-based collection by assembled by Kamal Shah and Gaurav Garg that includes an intergenerational and international group of women artists who have truly groundbreaking works. And we are so honored to launch our series of artist conversations with today's panel. You are in for a treat around the topic of gestural abstraction. One of the wonderful things about working with Kamal Shah and Cecilia Alamani on the exhibition here at BAM-PFA is that we're able to further hone in and build on some of the thematic threads within the show. And I love that immediately when you walk into the exhibition, it starts off really with a bang, with a gut punch, quite literally, in Aria Dean's piece, and with this giant, really immersive and incredibly vibrant large-scale painting by Mary Weatherford. In this section, we, kind of brought together many works, including Joan Mitchell, Mary Lovelace O'Neill, Lorna Simpson, among others, to explore the manifold approaches that artists across generations have wielded to explore abstraction, physicality, and gesture, from the sweeping and bold brushstrokes of Mary Weatherford's painting to the technologically rendered precision in the sculpture of Aria Dean. And these works expand upon discourses of abstraction and kind of go beyond them and through them in a way, imbued with social, political, and emotional resonances. And I'm so honored to introduce our distinguished guest this evening. Aria Dean is a New York-based artist, filmmaker, and writer who was born and raised in Los Angeles. Across her practice, Dean takes a critical approach to representation and narratives of identity, objecthood, and power. In her recent sculptural work, Dean has used digital modeling software to simulate force and collisions, like the gut punch. And in sculptural materials, using the strategies and aesthetics of post-American minimalist artists such as John Chamberlain, her recent solo exhibition, Abattoir, USA, ! Was commissioned for and debuted at the Renaissance Society in Chicago last year and traveled to the Institute of Contemporary Art in London and the Power Plant in Toronto. Mary Weatherford is a Los Angeles-based painter who has expanded the possibilities of abstraction. Her works offer feminist revisions of modernist abstraction and the genre of landscape painting and explores the social histories of California. Her approach to gestural abstraction takes painting as both a formal language and a poetic, highly personal mode of engagement with the world outside the studio. Weatherford's recent survey exhibition, Canyon, Daisy, Eden, was presented at the Tang Teaching Museum at Skidmore College in 2020 and Site Santa Fe in 2021, and she's had solo exhibitions at Museo del Palazzo Grimani in Venice and the Aspen Museum of Art and LAX Art, Los Angeles. Katy Siegel, who's moderating today's panel, is an art historian and curator specializing in post-war and contemporary art. She currently serves as the research director of special initiatives at SF MoMA, where she recently co-curated Get in the Game, a survey exhibition at the intersection of sports, art, and architecture. She worked closely with the Shah Garg Foundation and co-edited the publication for Making Their Mark with curator Mark Godfrey, which preceded our exhibition. Siegel curated and co-curated many important shows, including the 2021 retrospective of the painter Joan Mitchell, organized at SF MoMA and the Baltimore Museum of Art, and has published widely on modern and contemporary artists. She is also Distinguished Professor and inaugural Eugene V. and Claire E. Thaw Endowed Chair in Modern American Art at Stony Brook University in New York, and previously worked as Senior Curator for Research and Programming at the Baltimore Museum of Art. Her exhibition and book, High Times, Hard Times, was particularly influential for me as a curator, and illuminated how experimental painting played a pivotal role in the radical aesthetics and politics of the 1960s and 70s, and featured many artists in this exhibition too, including Linda Benglis, Howardina Pindell, Mary Hallman, Mary Corris, Harmony Hammond, and many others. And I'm very much looking forward to their conversation. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Katy. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I want to first congratulate Margot on such a beautiful show. I think a lot of us had the chance to see it in New York. It might look better here. And the light is beautiful. As Mary said, everything is perfectly lit. It's just such a joy to have it in the Bay Area all the way through April. And it's a great panel to kick off the artist talks because gesture is really central to the exhibition, to the book, to the research that went into it. It is called Making Their Mark, after all. So gesture is right at the center. And I wanted just to briefly set us up before we hear from Mary and Aria, and just to say something about why gesture might be particularly important to women. And you can see here is an article about the new generation of women painters for the first time in the 50s in the US getting attention. And Joan Semmel, who would be a generation afterward, says, if you look at the history of art, the kinds of images of women that are projected to us are not in any way as a mover, a person who comes from herself in any sense. And so even though that these women are the ones making the art, they are posed like they might as well be in an impressionist painting. They just get to keep their clothes on. But that's not the story behind the scenes, of course. This is Joan Mitchell from the same article, posed in her Paris studio, similarly passive. But that's also Joan, the biggest photograph in the center on the left. As a young woman, she was a national champion ice skater, diver, tennis, horseback, threw the occasional punch. Out of all that generation of the abstract expressionist painters, who were 90% men, they were big talkers, but she was the one who was the real athlete. She was the one who was physically tough. And not when she was young. Throughout her whole life, she continued to make enormous paintings. And someone said, how do you keep doing it? You've had a hip replacement, you're old. And she said, I just get up on the fucking ladder and do it. So really just an incredibly physical painter. And so it's really interesting and noticeable to see it across art history, very broad strokes, as it were. In the 60s and 70s, you see women sort of bringing their gesture and their physicality out in front. And as Sengat Ngudi on the right says, talking about a performance piece, she has a beautiful sculpture in the show. I'm concerned with the way life experiences pull and tug on the human body and psyche, and the body's ability to cope with it. And then Judy, you see Linda Benglis in the center, and Judy Chicago posed like a boxer on the left. I thought it was appropriate for Gut Punch. She says, I did struggle with my essential identity. Was I subject or object? I encountered expectations from me and from society that I be object, that I exist to fulfill men's needs, rather than be subject and fulfill my own needs. So she's being as aggressive as she can and assertive about being the actor and not the object. Another beautiful painting in the show, Maria Lasnik was really the master of entangling that subject and object that Judy Chicago is talking about. And this green paintress, it's such a beautiful painting, and everything she made was beautiful, but I thought it was especially important that Kamal have this work in the collection. The green paintress shows the artist twisting in on herself in an act of self-creation. And we see not abstraction, but a gesture making herself real, representing herself, not being represented by a man, and doing it through painting. Gestural abstraction has many uses and nuances. It can index presence and also question authenticity, reveal the ways that bodies move, and I hope we get to many of these issues tonight. I just wanted to start by anchoring us and recalling at this particular historical moment the very real importance, the very real high stakes of seeing women as people who act and do things in the world by and for themselves. Let's welcome Mary Weatherford.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mary Weatherford. Katy Siegel, thank you so much for that introduction. And I met Katy, I think, first when I was invited to be in a show about Helen Frankenthaler. And I wanted to thank Kamal Shah, especially in the honor of being in the Shah Garg Collection, which we didn't know would become the Shah Garg Collection when we first met. So, and thank everybody for coming out, 6:30. And we had a nice sunset, didn't we? And a big rainbow, which I guess we'll get to later, the rainbow. So, and thank you to the staff at the museum for organizing. I just thought I'd put together a few artists that sprang to mind when I read the title of this discussion about gestural abstraction. And I pictured 17 and 18-year-olds here, and I could sort of teach them something. Now, everybody seems to be past that. So sorry, it's a bit redundant. You already know this, but we'll just go through our favorite images anyway. So here's Jackson Pollock in the Springs. Great picture, especially with the cigarette. And William de Kooning, I don't know where this picture is from, but I like it because of the long brush. And if any of you haven't seen the film of him painting, he paints surprisingly slowly. It's very interesting. Here is Helen Frankenthaler working. And I was always interested that she wore her shoes. And then other pictures I've seen, she's wearing slippers. And then I was wondering if the slippers got paint on them. And it's an unstretched canvas, and I'm not sure what kind of paint that is. One of my favorite gestural abstractionists, Ed Clark, and I had the great honor of hearing him speak at the Mistake Room. And one of my favorite stories he told was he was living in Paris and he met Picasso at the art supply store. Great story. And when I see his paintings from afar, I get a little zing. I put this in here, arguably not gestural abstraction, but something to think about. This is Han Tai. The work is folded and dipped. And one of my favorite artists, probably not gestural abstraction at all, but there it is. And I remembered to add Shiraga today, painter of the Gutai movement, a post-war Japanese group of artists. And he paints with his feet, holding onto a rope for balance, but he paints with bare feet. Now, is gestural abstraction gestural if you use someone else's body to make the mark? That would be a question. And if you use your own body to make a mark, oh, that was Yves Klein. If you use your own body to make the mark, it is gestural, but is it abstraction? David Hammond's body print. a woman who has become a friend of mine, who I would say is a gestural abstractionist, is Katerina Groza. I don't know where this picture was taken, but her studio is in Berlin. So that brings me to my large paintings. This is called Below the Cliff, and it's the sister painting to the work that's in the show that's called Light Falling Like a Broken Chain. So what I wanted to do was walk you through the making of the work. Now, there aren't any pictures of me painting. It has been suggested that I put a GoPro in the ceiling of my studio, and I've yet to do that. But there are, there are 2 footprints you can see there. Now, I try to not leave the footprints. I try to take them out, but this painting took 11 hours. And so by the end of the 11 hours, it gets hard to erase them. So I like to use foot gloves. Now, I found these foot gloves online, and then I bought, and then the company went out of business, and we have spent, I'm not kidding you, since I painted that painting until now, looking for more foot gloves. I've hired a new assistant who somehow went down the rabbit hole on Instagram and found the dead stock in a garage in not Alhambra, but another town that sounds like Alhambra. Anyway, so I bought them all. So I have foot gloves for life. And so I want to show you my setup. I use sponges to paint with. I wear gloves when I'm painting because I touched too much cadmium when I was a student. And although I tested myself for cadmium recently and it's not so bad, but my arsenic's like quite high. I don't know how that. Anyway, so this is the painting of this painting. First time I'm kind of showing this. Here we go. We have the sound on. Oh, no. Oh, that's not the film. Okay, so is this a little movie? Yeah, it is. Okay, so I have to. What do I do to make it go? What do I do? Oh, okay, here it is. I can't find the. No, but I can't see it on my screen.
There, I got you. This right here, I'll show you. Wait, go, remove your fingers again.
But what are you seeing?
It's here we go. It's very hard to do it this way.
What to do? Oh. So a little bit more. So I go up on a ladder, look down at it. Ladder's 12 feet high. So you could see it's getting wetter because it starts to reflect the lights. I don't think that's even done. I don't think I took a. It was so late at night. I was so tired. And then we're going to have the same problem of I have to like coordinate on the screen.
There we go. There we go.
This is after we stretched it.
Turn the chalkboard. There we go. Very good. Okay, go back. Go back.
That's
So it's getting all straight in order.
okay. And the finished work. And this is when we were young. Thank you. That's it.
I think you're supposed to. Okay.
Am I supposed to remain?
I think you're supposed to be. I don't know. I'm not sure. Okay. Hi, I'm Aria Dean. Thank you for having me, Margot. Kamal, thank you. Thank you, Katie, as well, for moderating this, and everyone who, yeah, helped make this show possible, in this iteration and all of them. I am going to try to zoom through. Oh, here, sorry. I'm going to zoom through some slides about the work that's out there and some other works that are related. I messed up in translating some of these things onto this slideshow. So there are what were some video clips that are no longer video clips that are just images. And I decided, I guess I'll kind of act them out, which might actually support this work's relationship to gesture. Whoops. Anyway, okay. So yeah, this work is called Little Island Gut Punch, and it was originally shown in the 2022 Whitney Biennial. And the work came out of, I mean, in general, I had a ongoing obsession with minimalist work, especially the work of Robert Morris. And I didn't know that the Whitney Biennial, they can give you an assignment, but they gave me an assignment for my contribution, which was to look at the anti-illusion show that took place in 1970 at the Whitney, and sort of try to think through this question of illusionism or anti-illusionism in sculpture in the contemporary. And I've been making works existingly that involved 3D modeling and real objects and unreal objects. And so they kind of, and then also just like other works that were dealing with minimalist histories separately from the digital tool stuff. So this was what came out of that. And so to explain what the work is, basically the way that it was made is I had a monolith designed in a software that's about like the height, width, etc. And then leveled about the amount of force that I could level at the object, yeah, via this ball like thrown at it in the simulation. And this is where a clip would be helpful, but you can kind of see that it's we're looking at like, yeah, an animation, so there are timestamps like sort of on the bottom there. So the way that the work is produced is playing this animation through and then choosing a moment. So in a way, you know, I'd been for a long time obsessed, I guess, with this idea as well, like that sculpture, you know, essentially is a time-based medium. It's matter, time, and force, whether you're, you know, doing it yourself or a fabricator is doing it using classical, you know, sculptural processes or industrial ones. So kind of considering that, but in this sort of remediated, illusionistic space of a simulation, but at the same time, it being a simulation, in terms of people who deal with computers and computer simulations, it's not real either. So kind of dealing in that unclear space. Um, so yeah, that's that work. And then I started making more of these, and I guess it's just like to sort of, it's easier to talk about that work, I think, through the other works in the series, sort of, I think. So this is the second one that I made, and this is also where a clip, basically these two cubes fly at each other and they hit, and the way that I work with the designer to figure out how the objects interact is usually through, like, I just send him like basically what amounts to like short stories over email and like video clips. So for that one, I was like, I want it to feel like two rams like hitting and, you know, kind of like their horns rubbing up against one another, and like a Hollywood kiss a la Roman Holiday at the same time. So this is one of the works that came out of that. So the two cubes are kind of like making out, and they're kind of obsessed with each other, and or fighting at the same time. And then of course also, I guess the thing to mention as well is this
chroma key green. I guess, like, in terms of, I guess most of the work I've made, I've also been trying to work through this problem of, I guess, yeah, in terms of like art in general, but also identity, kind of, the idea that an object, can and should be projected upon the viewer, completes the work, etc. But also, as a woman, as a Black woman artist, also sort of continually having this feeling of like making stuff, and no matter what I've stated or what the work shows itself its own preoccupations to be, as a lot of projection happens. So the green screen being a tool for projecting unreal backdrops and impossible scenarios, but also um kind of just being, I think, again, thinking about the histories of minimalism, this sort of a signifies, I mean, it's hard to say if it signifies or doesn't signify, but it's like blank, yet it has a world of a signification that it brings with it. But also it is functional. And strangely, in all these iterations, no, one person, only one person used it as an actual green screen and sent me a video of what they'd done. Then other things that are kind of in this world. So, yeah, John Chamberlain was mentioned. Was thinking a lot about him, and was thinking about Robert Morris as well. And then as I continued with these works, I also started. I always was thinking about Rodin, and especially Rosalind Krauss's. Right, I've kind of, I think, basically since I've been making these works, I've reread passages in modern sculpture once a year and come away with different feelings every time. But yeah, like this, especially this Rodin, I'm from Pasadena, and that one is at the Norton Simon, and I grew up going there and seeing that work, and a lot of those. So thinking about also, like, most of these exist in editions or kind of groupings of 5 objects that are pulled from the same event. So also kind of, there's a part of it that for me, I guess I was thinking as well about like the event as the artwork, and then these objects are kind of like, strange instantiations that get pulled from this one singular moment. Rodin, and then I made a work where I just took this Psyche by Rodin that I bought online, twisted twisted it and collapsed it. And yeah, thinking about Boccioni as well, and sort of, again, like, maybe like sketching time and space in 3 dimensions. I also, I guess, as you were speaking, Mary, I was trying to think of, I was like, oh yeah, like, who are other people who are kind of like floating around in the background of this? I was, I've thought often, I'm not a huge Jasper Johns fan, but the bite thing, that work, that if you've seen that I think has to do with this. And as well. Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, so then that's that. And then these are some more recent ones in this same body of work. I moved from using the cubes and the monoliths and stuff to, that was always kind of like this attempt to, I guess, like beta test the process, kind of like making what and I started calling all these like action figures in my mind. So they do have this relationship, I guess, to like action painting and things. But so these are a horse toy I used, and I melted it, and then that one's crushed up. And then this is from this most recent show I did in LA. It was the elephant from the Hollywood and Highland facade, and I threw it against a wall. Um, and then I guess the final thing I'll say, because I know I'm probably talking for too long, but final thing I'll say is with the gut punch one too. I think something really important about that work for me was the material that it like simulates in the actual simulation. Part of what was interesting as well is that I wanted to try to make materials that didn't feel like materials we knew from our world. So in working on it with Max, who did the animation, we talked a lot about like, okay, like 30% metal, like 30% fabric, 40%. So kind of like trying to find something that would feel, and I don't know if this is successful or not. It, remains to be seen. The viewer has to decide, but that doesn't quite feel right. Like it doesn't feel like something that you recognize when you approach it, but it is, so it's kind of got this inability to reference actual, like, yeah, material or semiotics, etc. And then also the title, Little Island Gut Punch. Little Island is the park that's to the right of the side of the that's like looking out over the Hudson River. There's this park, Little Island, there, and David Hammond's Days End public sculpture on that side. And that was also something they wanted me to think about. I thought it was interesting, sort of this idea of like this little island park that, I don't know if you've ever been there, it kind of just is a park that's kind of linear, and it leads you up to this lookout point where you can kind of take a picture of like either New Jersey or like the city. And I don't know, this like what it sort of was thinking too about the history of New York, and New York kind of becoming, this was like kind of also, just after COVID, and the city had really changed a lot. It had gone through like very weird periods, and New York as this sort of like becoming this empty set, or like a sort of green screen backdrop. And then the Day's End work on the other side as well, like remediating New York City's history, by marking the pier where that Gordon Model Clark already marked, and so kind of thinking about those kind of like loop-de-loops. And yeah, I mean, I guess just basically I'm always thinking about the history of sculpture and making sculptures. So that's it.
I wanted to dig in a little bit to art history since we all kind of started there. And part of what the Shah Garg Collection is about generational relationships. But obviously, you're both looking much more broadly than only at art by women. And I guess you're also share something. Your practices are so different, but you're both really intellectual in a very strong way, and you both study art history. So I wonder if we could start with a little bit digging into that. Mary, if you want to start us off.
Mic is on, or it's not. It goes like that. Yeah. Okay, now it's on. Okay. Let's see.
I mean, we met partly since you alluded to it, because I was writing an essay about Helen Frankenthaler's influence or relationship to other artists, and I saw your work in a small gallery in the Lower East Side, and I thought, which is not to say that that's where you have to start, but I just thought, here's someone who's thinking about art history, the stain, the light. This is someone who knows what's been happening in painting for the last 50, 100 years. But you start where you want to.
I don't know. I'll just throw it out like art history. I mean, I think like probably anyone who's at this lecture has one of those childhood memories of mine is actually the Van Gogh show at the LA County Museum when I was very young. So I think it was in 71. I was born in 63, so I'm like under 10 years old. And the new building had just opened, the one they just tore down. So I remember it fondly. And my father held me up in front of Crows Over a Wheat Field, which is one of Van Gogh's last paintings. So he gets to the double squares at the end of his life, which I didn't know until I was an adult. So I'm held in front of Crows Over a Wheat Field. And my father can be a very dramatic and serious person. He's a preacher. And he said, this is the most frightening painting that I've ever seen. And it is written about as such, Crows Over a Wheat Field. And if you do look at it, it is frightening. So that was my first experience with the power of painting. Because, I mean, he told me to be scared, and I was scared. I remember looking this way. I saw boats on the shore. I was like, well, that's not so scary. But I have that very deep memory of that. And we lived in Baldwin Hills, and the museum was very easy to get to. I went on a field trip maybe a year later without my parents, and got off the bus and saw pools, colored pools. You can start guessing who these artists are. Different pools of different colors. I went inside, and there was a room with boxes all the way to the ceiling. I went in another room, and there was like mirrors everywhere. Mirrors, mirrors, mirrors. There was a table that was made of mirrors. There was a chair that was made of mirrors. Everything was made of mirrors. I went into another room, and there's like, what was it? Like, what are those laser beams everywhere? Laser beams. I went in another room and there seemed to be a pool table filled with bubbling mud. And I could stand for a long time and watch the mud bubble up and then suck down in. So as I was leaving, I walked by a whole wall of three-dimensional pictures of daisies. And above this wall was a garden hose like the kind that we had at home for the grass, and it was green with little holes in it, and the water was spraying down like a shower in front. And I thought, this guy didn't try very hard. So fast forward 20 years, I'm at Princeton paging through an art forum. And so you could go through it. It's Gordon Matta Clark. It's Lucas Samaras. It's Tony Smith. It's Rockne Krebs. It's Robert Rauschenberg. And the last artist is Andy Warhol. And even as a child, I knew he didn't try very hard. That's a joke. But so there, that's sort of how I came to love art pretty early.
Is there a context for the painting? And where, how did you start painting? Where did it come from? What were you in dialogue with?
I grew up making crafts. All kinds of crafts, working with my mother, and then sort of car repair and woodwork with my father. But I always, I took a painting class where I painted an oil painting of who knows, like a tiger or something like this. It wasn't until I got to Princeton, but I was fully aware of modern contemporary art because of this La Jolla Museum of Contemporary Art. But when I got to Princeton, I could take an art class from an artist that actually lived in New York City. My first art class was with Jerry Buchanan, who passed away very early on from AIDS. I was completely flipped into the questions of how to make art. And, as an undergrad, cycled through a lot of copying, mostly sculpture, copying Eva Hesse, copying Eva Hesse. Maybe kind of at the end, graduating to some kind of biomorphic plaster works. But painting came when I moved to New York City. I lived in an apartment. Why did I start painting? Maybe because I started drawing first, and then because I lived in a small apartment, and then the drawing led to the painting, and then I fell in with a bunch of people from Yale, and they loved painting, so then I loved painting. So then I got interested in painting more and more and more as something I did, but I studied art history at school, so I don't want to go on too long, but I had to major in art history at the same time that I majored in studio art. They don't let you have at Princeton, if you're a studio art major, you're an art history major. If you're a theater major, you're a English major or comp major. If you're you have to learn how to write, and this is their way of doing that. And I'm grateful for it. And so I took art. I was in love with art history and wrote about it. Tom Crow was one of my. In fact, Tom Crow, I took my first art history class from Tom Crow, and then I couldn't understand how everything wasn't taught in that way, which I found was unusual later on. And I guess that would mean a kind of analysis of the social milieu in which the work was made.
Aria, you have that very specific sequence of Rodin, Chamberlain, and Robert Morris, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit, and then your early experiences with light and space. And
I guess the Rodin, I was saying the Rosalind Krauss, she talks about him multiple times in passages in Modern Sculpture, but there's the essay about time and Rodin and sort of both like, sort of seriality via kind of like, like making these like, like cast objects, and then kind of like the pose across, I can't remember the name of the work, but with the three figures. And so I guess I was trying to, I mean, I kind of was so obsessed with this idea of like making sculpture that was about time. I mean, even possibly making sculpture that was about like cinema. I mean, those things are animations, so they're kind of like about, yeah, sort of a narrative event, I suppose, or something, and like freezing a moment from that. And then I mean, Chamberlain was an early love of mine, or I mean, relatively early. Yeah, like, I think, like, I'd seen like, we were talking about this the Pacific Standard Time, I don't remember what year that was, but I think it was the first one they did that was, like, about just, like, LA, like, art history, and I think I probably saw John Chamberlain for the first time in that, but then I also worked at MoCA, right after college in LA, and there was, like, this Chamberlain that might still be, perennially, like, in, like, front and center in the permanent collection galleries, and so I would walk by this John Chamberlain, like, every single day and kind of just stare at it. And so in a way, I think Chamberlain for me, until recently actually, was kind of just uh like back of my mind, like just kind of always there. And I think I just like always I think also I've been attracted to work that kind of has, I mean, I guess, yeah, Chamberlain gets a rap for being sort of this like masculinist, sort of just like crash, boom, like John Chamberlain smash. And so I think I've loved that. I think because, I don't know, like when I went to school, I went to Oberlin College, and I think at the time, I don't know how it is now, but it was really the people who were teaching there were very much coming out of like a 90s like performance and kind of a identity kind of focused like yeah, discursive frame. So I was doing mostly like stuff in architecture and architectural theory and history, and taking art classes and trying to kind of join the two. Discovered Gordon Mata Clark and was like, oh, I don't have to become an architect, I can just like make art that, yeah, destroys architect, whatever. So I think, but that's all to say that I started, I think like people like Chamberlain were and Gordon Mata Clark were interesting too, because I guess I was going to say that whenever I had an idea, the professors were like, it should be a performance, or like use your body, like talk about your feelings. And I mean, I think at this point, thankfully, I've worked my way beyond reacting against that. Like, I think for a long time I was like caught in this loop with that. But so I guess I sort of, yeah, in a sort of like reactionary or like petulant way, was driven towards some of those things. And then Robert Morris, just absolutely like fell in love with him at a certain point. I don't even know like when. I think I read Notes on Sculpture in those years as well, and that was just like there also was at Oberlin there was this like conceptual art history through the Allen Art Museum. There were like some pretty important like early shows and early, like they had a pretty good collection of modern contemporary work from that vein. This like Art in the Mind show that happened in like 70 something. I don't know. So we were kind of constantly, if you took art classes, you were being pushed towards that history as well. So I think I read Robert Morris in that context, and like saw Lewitt, and people like that. But it was kind of the way they taught it. I mean, I guess I was saying, even we were just talking casually before this, I focused on architectural history and theory. I didn't do art history survey courses, and somehow they let me get away with that at Oberlin, unlike at Princeton. And so my way, I was just like vacuuming up, I feel like, everything and not really putting it in its right place or whatever. So kind of just like, yeah, like a free flow. And I guess that also squared with like certain directions in art that was being made on or around the internet around that time, in like the early to mid 2010s, the kind of like hoovering up of content, and flattening of stuff. But now I'm like way more obsessed with like putting things in their right places. And so the gut punch thing, as I was directed to, is a much more focused response, I guess, to yeah, like a what would anti-illusionism look like now. And yeah, I don't know, I'm kind of just like going on and on. But the Rodin, I feel like, is like also, that is like, and I was trying to think as you were speaking, like the earliest experiences I can think of. And I think because of the Norton Simon, like that work is like burned into my mind. And I think for years and years and years, I just like had the images of, I don't even think I knew which one was like outside of the museum there. But then also the light and space stuff in that LA, the first PST show. I got really obsessed with that. And also because of like, yeah, like yeah, JPL being kind of like Pasadena, and these like, math and science. I'm not a math and science person at all, but I thought that work was quite cool, as well as like McCracken. But the first thing I can ever remember, like art-wise, I think like it is of like a work that felt like contemporary was, and I don't remember what year it is, but the Cristo Central Park red flags thing my mom took my brother and I to
Mom's
go-
here.
mom's
Yeah.
here and brother's here. I remember it was like winter time and we went to the Met, and I remember looking into the park and like I was like, that's so okay, well, you can do, I don't know, that was like a you can do that moment. And that was really cool. And yeah, so yeah, I don't know.
So how much are you talking back to art history with Gut Punch?
I mean, I guess like I think I was trying not to talk back too much. I mean, I think I generally try to, I don't think, like for me, I don't find it that interesting to speak directly back. I think my hope is to take, compress, rework, keep moving forward, like so. But the assignment was very much to like respond. So I kind of, yeah, like it kind of, I got kind of like, I don't know, which was cool. I'm glad for that. But I think it came out of that anti-illusion conversation, but it went somewhere else pretty quickly. I mean, I think the choice to use like a monolith came out of that, because in order to, I mean, I think I got interested in like work from that period and that scene because I think for me and also in dealing with like more political questions around identity as well, I was like, okay, if I'm gonna like try to figure out how to make something that squares with my ideas around like moving beyond the sort of like, idea that there's a certain feminine aesthetic or a certain like Black aesthetic, et cetera, how to like what kind of like tactics I could use. I have to use like a neutral object. So the monolith kind of both was like a, just rectilinear shapes. It doesn't really, but then also it kind of then also still has its like significance insofar as it's like a monolith, and even the word calls up ideas around how, models of history and, you know, people were like, it's so phallic, like, like whatever. And I guess the shape of the base kind of gives it a bit of, so yeah, I think like it was responding, but then as soon as it existed, came to be in the world, because also with the way these are made, it's like so much digital work. And then it kind of like, I meet it for the first time, probably usually alongside a curator. So meeting the sculpture, I was like immediately aware that it was not about that anymore. And yeah, I don't know, it was more about like, I don't know, I'm not even sure. Just like, I guess about force and just about like applying force. And it became way more, it was exciting because it was like, oh, I'm actually now just like in the present with like, making sculptural work. I'm not like talking to myself about it. It's kind of like now I'm like, even though I'm not really touching it, I'm actually just working the material. So yeah.
I love your impression of a monolith.
Yeah.
I'm a monolith. It's a very physical sense. And I think both of your works give us such a visceral response to the viewer. We can imagine you making the work. We can imagine the work getting punched, getting pushed around, the paint getting pushed around. And I wonder if you could both say something a little bit about process and what its role is in your work.
So I just wanted to say about this picture, because I was thinking about art history and the formal format of it, which is completely different from all of the images that I showed, is Baroque painting. So I had finished the exhibition in Venice and did another visit to the academia, and I was there early. I got there early in the morning, there weren't people there, and the there's a Tintoretto, I believe, and there's oftentimes a saint or somebody, something coming crashing down through the upper boundary of the painting, a kind of glorious thing, whether it be a saint, an angel, the word of God. There's something crashing into the scene to perform a miracle, generally, or to send a message. And that's the format I chose purposefully for this painting. And so my picture is very pictorial in its format, lifted from Baroque painting. It's not an all-over painting like the ones I showed. It is a narrative of an occurrence or several occurrences in a estuary in Hawaii. I mean, what could come crashing through? There are giant seabirds that drop into the water that catch fish. So oftentimes, like on the way here, I said I'd mention the rainbow. I've been in Hawaii when it's some other tourists said it's rainbow season. And I didn't know that there could be a rainbow season. And they had been driving around looking at rainbows. And so in that whole series of works, I sought to capture the colors and feelings of Hawaii, specifically Kauai, but that's quite unimportant. But I wanted to say that it does have its very art historical format of the light that's crashing through that causes some kind of change. Yeah.
Process, yeah. Well, yeah. So, I mean, I think that with these, I mean, well, one on the like sort of practical level, the process is me on my computer emailing Max or Harry, and maybe video chatting here and there. But it's a lot of like conceptualizing the objects. It's like a lot of, I mean, yeah, essentially, yeah, just like kind of like, oh, what if like there were two cubes that were like fighting and making out, that kind of thing. So like, and it is, I mean, I write a lot as well. So, I mean, I think there's a way in which like, even beyond these objects, everything I do, usually I write like a paragraph to myself that's like describes the object, and I diagram and I draw, but it's very verbal. But I think, yeah, I mean, I think process is important. I think these objects came out of, again, with the anti-illusionism thing, like, that show was about all these works that privilege process over object. And I think that, with my work, I was really interested in trying to, again, make something that, is a unitary form, is an object, but also is in process. And I think that, and so based kind of in, I think, like in as a theoretical proposition as well, in terms of like, how should we think about things? Like, like, can things continue to be in flux, though they appear to be, like solid, present, etc. So these objects, yeah, I think it was like with the first few, it was like, hey, freeze it, like it's in the process of becoming, but it's not becoming, it's not coming into being or exiting necessarily. It's just like in the sort of like undulating space. And then the more recent ones, I guess, are a little bit different in that they are kind of like the Rodin one I showed, the yellow one. It is an object that something has happened to. Like it is not quite in the midst of it. And I think that's a shift that it's a different conversation in some ways, but I think it's an interesting one that I've been kind of grappling with, because I think there is something different, like freezing something and yanking it out of that space versus like applying force and having the result come into our world or whatever, or applying simulated force. So yeah, I think process is really important. And I think like the format, I think it's interesting in working with these modelers, because I'm like, I don't care what it looks like. It's like it's about the action. And I think that and it's funny because at some point I was like, I don't really know what I would say about like gestural abstraction and like, abstract. And they're like, oh wait, this actually is very related to that. But I was so caught up in the, my Robert Morris land. But yeah, I think that the process was really important. And I think the form is incidental to just, like the Rodin twisted psyche thing. It's like I did twisted and deflated, twisted, and one I kind of knocked her over the head. And I think there's a way that it's supposed to just be whatever kind of comes out of that action, and applying the amount of force that I dictate to the modeler. But then they're very but what shape do you want it to be? I'm like, I don't care. Which I think is, there's a mismatch there in terms of but I'm interested in making work that kind of seems like it's supposed to be something that's ooh, yeah, look at it, but it's kind of just, kind of landed the, kind of sidelong and in a weird way.
I mean, I think that's the, part of one of the enduring appeals of gesture, or whatever you call it, gestural abstraction, or a Rodin sculpture where there's a gesture being made, is that the things don't look dead. You want art that looks, I mean, at least some of us do, that looks like it's alive. And when you look at both of your works, you have that feeling something's happened, a person has done something might still happen, it's still going on. And I think that's really important for a lot of historical artists who work with gestural abstraction of one kind or another.
I really liked what you said about the David Hammons thing. Also, the because that was something that I was thinking about. Kind of if with the gut punch thing, it's okay, this is still this monolith. Something has hit it, so it looks kind of weird, but it's technically may not be an abstraction. It's a mutilation, and I think that I hadn't thought about the Hammonds and sort of if you just are leaving out this sort of trace element of your own body. Yeah, I don't know. It was very well phrased, so I liked that.
Okay, so if the paintings are big, they're footprints in my paintings, and I try to cover them up. I try to keep them out because I think that if I let them stay in there, that the painting will become about that. And if I try my best to get them out, and I will swear, I try my best to get them out. There is no footprint that I have seen that I haven't erased. I have never left a footprint in there on purpose. Oh, that would be cool. So any footprint you see is simply that maybe the water was too deep to see it, because it's oftentimes flooded with water. And I don't want the work to be, and I'm going to use probably the wrong word here, but coy in that way. That, now I suppose if I really, really, really didn't want it, I could create some kind of shoe that didn't look like a foot, but I've tried all kinds of things to put on my feet, and they're too slippery. I've gone through many iterations of how to do it. And the foot gloves don't slip. So there is that. There's the and I always thought about it, because do you remember those Joel Shapiro charcoal drawings from the 80s? Or there were a lot of sculptors' drawings where they would accidentally on purpose leave a whole lot of fingerprints on them. Do you remember this? So yeah, there was a time when the fingerprint was left in on purpose, which art history flips me back to one of my favorite lectures that I have ever heard, is that, Matisse was getting very bad reviews. He was painted in the south of France. Picasso was getting great reviews, and people were saying, this looks too easy. He's such a flippant artist. And what he did, he made the decision. Do you know the Matisse's when he's rubbed out a part and moves the arm? And oh my goodness, he's rethought this completely on purpose. And after that, the reviews got better. When he showed the work that was behind it, it wasn't flippant, it wasn't bourgeois. And I am so sorry I'm forgetting the scholar that did this work, but I saw this lecture at the Norton Simon and it made me love Matisse more. Like, I just love, like, he's beating me at the reviews. I got to show I work hard. And so know your work. So there's like that, like a funny decision of like how much of the hand to leave in the work, how much of the hand to disappear. That's a really interesting question. How, like, and I remember, do you remember Toba Kadori? And there'd be like little dog footprints all over it. And you'd think, like, just keep the dog out of your studio. Like, the accidentally on purpose thing, you know. So I think about that.
Yeah. It's funny because I feel like for me, I've had the opposite. Like I did this show at Green Naftali called, like the first show I did with them called Show Your Work Little Temple. That was like, basically I was obsessed with this idea. Like I should get like, I like in order to like have like a style. I mean, I was like, I wasn't interested in having a, like, a signature in that way, but I felt that like, at the moment, I don't know, it felt like, oh, like, but I should be. And also I think because I'd been working already sort of digitally and let's say impersonally or industrially in some way, I was like, but I miss like having like something of me in this, or like or recognizing, yeah, my hand or whatever. So I was like doing these drawings and then like kind of stretching them digitally and like manipulating them and then engraving them using this like weird cryogenic engraving process that I worked with a fabricator, but on these like gum sole eraser kind. And it was like a joke about like Rauschenberg and de Kooning and like, but the whole thing was like this. I mean, I liked the work that came out of it, but I look back on it and I'm like, I just like, if I don't like working that way, then I don't like, if I like not having a signature or a hand and being able to zip through. And even like with these sculptures, I do love making these action figures, as I've called them in my head. But at the same time, even though they're like, I'm not touching them, I don't have any, like my hand isn't there, I can see that there's a signature that is like building across them, because they do, by virtue of the softwares and the material, they're kind of, they're a body of work. And so I'm a little bit like, gotta move on or something, kind of like, keep it a bit more impersonal. And I guess also because I feel like I work in this sort of like weird, like analytical, theoretical way where I'm like, don't want it to express something in particular. But I don't know, but it's interesting. But I guess with that show, I had to like find a way to force my hand into it because it was all, but kind of not, I don't know, it didn't have to be made by me in a certain way. So it was kind of I guess I'm not quite the same as Matisse. Like, I don't know. Yeah, a bit contrived.
But the art historical reference is that the sculpture isn't simply the battered monolith. It's also the sort of drum-like platform, which is straight out of Brancusi.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Yeah, there is
the choice that the platform becomes part of the sculpture.
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah, that was
think about that.
That was part of the. I mean, yeah, because like I did this piece that was a replica of this Robert Venturi column that's at Oberlin College. That's like a sort of postmodernized like Ionic column, and it was like Ionic was like the name of it. And so I did this replica of that I showed at Green Naftali. And so then for all of the sculptures I was making, including this one, that sort of like corrugated, like slatted base thing, it just basically took like a slice of the Venturi column and used that as the base then for all the sculptures. So just kind of like replicated that format, I guess, as some sort of like, I mean, so, but then it was like, it was the Brancusi move where I was like, okay, then like the base must be part of the sculpture, but the format of the base must be like historicized within my own practice. And it's like architectural, but the architecture is turned into like, just the support for, and kind of, I don't know, I guess in some weird way, like allegorizing, like, I don't know, like certain elements of my own thought process from a period. But yes, so to the short answer, yes, it was a Brancusi thing. But then recently I've been like, I don't know, I guess I'm so changeable with how I think things should be. Like I thought I was like, just like Brancusi is right. We have to put but then I think now, with those works, I think I got interested then I put some of them on palettes, like, that were also still though like functionally had to be part of the work and were produced in that way. But yeah, so yeah.
I feel like it's such a deep topic. We could really just dig in for hours about touch and signature and fingerprints, and that all of that is a choice, and how far you go with it. But I want to make sure that people get a chance to ask questions. So does anybody have anything for Mary and Aria?
Hello. Hi, Mary. I love your work so much. I wanted to ask about your use of light, and does that come before or after or during? And is that still a medium that you're using?
So the questioner is asking about my use of neon light in the works, and I thought that up in 2012 when I made a show for Bakersfield, for Cal State Bakersfield. And it really came out of a long, I had made collage kind of paintings for a long time using seashells and sponges and Xerox transfers and silk screens. So then that shifted into neon light attached to the painting. And in the exhibition that this picture was in, I had mixed between paintings with no neon light attached and paintings with neon light attached. And my hope was that as I discussed the theme of this light crashing through the top of the painting, so it's called Light Falling Like a Broken Chain Paradise, which is actually named after that giant painting in the Doge's Palace in Venice. But so my hope was that light itself would emanate from the very canvas. And I've gone further with that in a show I had in New York in January, where then I began to pour white paint into the wet, dark paint, which created kind of interior light as well. But I still am screwing neon lights to paintings, but also in May, will also be showing some new seashell collages. So I continue to add things to the surface when I feel like it.
As is your right. Yes. Another question here.
Yeah, I'm not a 2 or 3D artist. I'm a musician, but that's kind of irrelevant. But I'm always intrigued by the medium and how you do things. So, like, how do you get your green paint so smooth? How did you get the whole sculpture so perfectly smooth? I'm like kind of blown away by that.
Well,
looking at
I
it
can't
close.
take any credit for it at all. I worked with really great fabricators who do just all kinds of art fabrication and industrial fabrication. I mean, the object is made out of a really heavy foam, and it's just milled by basically just 3D model plugged into the software, and then the computer just operates this CNC machine and just mills it in layers essentially, and then they piece it together, and then there's a primer layer, and then it's but the paint is just kind of industrial, kind of car paint basically. And yeah, and they just so I mean, I wish I've been to the place where they do it, but I'm not allowed to touch it at all.
Other questions? Someone in the back?
Thank you so much. We've been talking about art history so much that I couldn't help kind of go way back and think about, and Pliny the Elder talks about maybe the first account of gestural abstraction with the Greek painter Protogenes, who is trying to paint the froth of a dog and just gets really frustrated. He can't do it. And he just throws a sponge at the wall and gets it just right. And so it just makes me think, in a way that might apply for both of you, to think about chance, really, and to think about the aesthetics of chance. But differently in the case of Pliny, because it's an aesthetics of chance, a kind of an aleatory aesthetic that's not, that's either anti-illusionistic or non-illusionistic. So what chance looks like, what is a mark that doesn't look right, if that makes sense, another way to put it.
I can go first. Yeah, it's a good question. I think with the sculptures, I guess there's no mark really. But in terms of the shape or the form, I think so usually when I make all of these, pretty much I work in, whether it's in addition or just I think they're all unique, but whatever, different people have different ideas about how to classify objects' relationships to one another. But it's above my pay grade. But I think that to me it's it's about the relationship between the versions of the object. So there's no form. I think it's usually I'll do one and it's kind of there is this chance operation where you just twister, and then we see where that goes. And usually also it's we'll do it and he'll run the simulation all the way, kind of to the sort of logical computational endpoint of twisting the object, let's say. And then I'll watch it and I'll stop. It's I'll be I like where we landed here, and then maybe he'll pull that out. And then from there, I feel it's we just do it a bunch of times. And I think then it's once there's one form for me, then it's the other four are kind of these chance operations where it's just okay, run it and then run it again. And it's and then maybe deflate also. So then we're adding another computational, simulational strategy. And yeah, and I think it just kind of, but I don't think there's ever been really, for me, it's also, there is a problem with these works where there are things that can happen in the simulation that can't be fabricated in real space. So with the gray one I did for Green Naftali a few years ago, that one, there had to be some smoothing of the surface, which I think I was very upset about because I do believe, again, it's the process oriented thing. It's it should just be as it was when I scanned this toy horse. The surface should have the little ridges of the fur on the plastic surface of the horse, but experimentation, you have to take some L's here and there. But yeah, so I think that it's all about the relationship between the objects. And I guess it looks wrong when it's when it requires, when it it's the balance is just can it be produced as a physical object? And it's interesting, as I've been working with this process over the last 3 going on 4 years or whatever, I have a better sense now for oh, we're not going to be able to make that, or that's the kind of fold that can't, I can spot now, and the modelers I work with are okay at it, but they're actually usually working in digital space more and aren't so good at thinking about what happens when it gets translated. So I've kind of found myself becoming this weird go between fabricators and this software zone, and then actual fabricators, and being oh, that's a kind of angle that there's no way that if we're 3D printing, the printer can't understand that unless we print it in 3 pieces, and so things like that. So it's really very functional. And I guess this goes back to I don't know, I wanted to be an architect at a point in time, so it's I when it's I don't have to make choices that are just expressive ones in terms of object making. It's purely can this exist in real space or not? And that's kind of the logic that I use. Yeah.
It really is a whole different vocabulary from the things that we're maybe used to talking about in terms of historical art. Maybe one more wrap-up question, if someone has something that feels summary.
I had a question for Aria, because I'm a little familiar with your work from Sherry, and it seems like you're very diverse, and it seems like you have a lot of different projects. So I'm just wondering, in the creative process, how you work on a variety of projects at the same time, or is there some sort of continuity in your heart that leads you to the spaces that you and materials and subjects?
Yeah, I think there's kind of like underlying questions that link all of them. I mean, I think in across writing and art and film, the kind of like, how do we know that something is what it is, kind of like, or when does an object cease to be itself, is a question that kind of like, but I also, yeah, like my background in undergraduate study and I continue to do, philosophy was kind of and philosophy and architecture were my first love. So these questions about just like the substance of reality kind of, I think, are pretty much driving everything. And then also just, again, these historical questions about like, I guess like studying art history piece by piece and asking like what these things mean in like new, like material, technological, cultural, like context. Like, it's not 1970, but the question of anti-illusionism to me is a relevant one, but it has to be reconfigured for now. And then I also just, at this point, I just spend like 2 years at a time on a given project. Like at the last show I did, I spent like 2 years like working on it between the like research and object making and stuff. And so I get kind of obsessed with like a manifestation of the questions, and I spend an unnecessarily long amount of time on it. But yeah.
So wait, since you studied philosophy, I've been wondering, is there such a thing as chance?
That's not exactly my philosophical bag. I'm more of like a phenomenology. But I don't know. I don't know. I think it's like
I've been wondering, sitting here thinking, what could possibly be chance?
Yeah. It's a good, yeah. I feel like it's like, in the context of my work, in a sense, there really isn't. I don't know.
No, because even what you were describing, there's a decision that something's happening and you say, stop here. So then that is your decision.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in decision making in the context of the painting. Mm-hmm. And I hope to show that when I was showing the process, because it's a kind of a process of like, well, I'll kick it off with yellow. And then I left in the audio that sighed and said what to do.
Yeah.
And I would say that even Hantai isn't chance. He's like, that's not, is it chance? If you operate on a painting, say, I will fold this painting into 84 times and dip it one corner in paint and then unfold it, is what happens chance? No, because you created an operation. So I was trying to think up something that was chance.
Yeah.
I think something, and this may be just tedious, but I think it's interesting that there's a force that's acting and a person or a machine or something that's acting, and then material is resistant. And so it, like the horse that doesn't come out correctly or whatever, it's very difficult. You can find operations that leave less and less room for material to resist your force.
Well, I guess it's like the sort of like difference between like total like chance in the form of like absolutely like uncontrolled kind of like chaos.
But maybe you're talking about unintentional.
Yeah, but then also I think like in sort of like art historical context, like the idea of like like a Cagean aesthetic and like chance operations. I think there's so many for a variety of like true usages of that, and then these sort of like it's like the aesthetic of chance or something. Also,
I just can't. Yeah, but isn't it the aesthetic of an operation that? Like, I'm just sitting here thinking there must be somebody who has thought about this. Like, I'm coming to chance does not exist. That's the Duchampian joke of the strings, the whatever, seven standard stoppages, that because of the physicality, when you're dealing with objects, but even when you're Yeah, see, I just start to get mind blown.
This one, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but I think simulations are, I mean, I think it is, I mean, again, I'm not like I'm not involved enough in like, I think like the larger world of like simulation, like theories and practices of that. But I think it is interesting thing, like, a simulation like Houdini as a software. I mean, I think that is like the big philosophical question about it is like, at what point are you really designing something to specific specs, but like at what point is the simulation running and actually like creating it, its own, I don't know. And I mean, I guess it's like, it kind of does come back to a very,
Oh my goodness, are we all the way to talking about AI? Like, is that what's happening?
Not know
Okay,
how
we
that
get
happened.
so I don't think so.
Maybe it's just being in the Bay Area. This sounds like a conversation that should continue at a bar. So I want to thank Aria and Marian. Wonderful conversation, and thank you for coming.